Welcome for this second part of the lecture about the evolution of vertebrates. So we've been through the first great transition in vertebrate evolution, which was the story from sea to land. So the evolution from water animals that are adapted to life in water to land-dwelling animals. And I told you that those land-dwelling animals were called the tetrapods, and we are tetrapods because we do have those four limbs. We have two hands, we have 2 feet, so we do belong to the group called the tetrapods. And now we are going to peer into the diversification of those tetrapods, and particularly those of reptiles, of mammals, and finally the dinosaurs. So we are going to talk about the dinosaurs. A paleontologist will finally talk about the interesting stuffs. So this story starts in the Carboniferous. So remember, it started in the Cambrian with the Conodonts, and we continued during the Age of Fish in the Devonian. And now we move up to the Carboniferous and Permian. So around 300 million years from now, we are still in the Paleozoic though. And we are moving away from the Cape Mountains into this inland basin that is the Karoo. So the Karoo is a very large, very wide basin with a lot of sediments covering about 100 million years of the history of life on Earth, piled into those sediments that you can see there, and the siltstone most particularly, and alternating with sandstone, thicker sandstone. So the siltstone are alternating with sandstones, and they cover everything from the Dwica group, which is the Carboniferous, to the Eka and middle and upper Permian. So this is all Permian, and the Triassic, and up to the Jurassic, with the lava of the Drakensberg that ultimately covered completely the Karoo 200 million years ago and stopped the sedimentation there. So 100 million years of life history is covered by the Karoo, and this includes some of the most important events in the history of life on Earth. One of the most important being the end Permian mass extinction. So in between here, the upper Permian and the Triassic, here between the yellow and the green, you have this event, the end Permian mass extinction. We talked about it quickly when we talked about the Echinodermata, and I told you about Myosidaris. If you remember, Myosidaris, which was the only surviving echinoid after the end Permian mass extinction. Well, this is it. 252 million years ago, the Permian mass extinction happened, and so 90% of all species that became extinct. So 19% of every living thing died during the end Permian mass extinction. It's the most important extinction event that ever happened. More important, more severe than the extinction, that the dinosaur extinction that we will see later. And it constitutes the limit between the Paleozoic and Mesozoic. That's why we put the limit there between the Permian and the Triassic. It's because it's the largest extinction event. And we do have a very interesting record of this end Permian extinction. So South Africa is the only place in the world where you have a complete record of the end Permian extinction on the continental realm. So the continental sediments that I've shown you in the Karoo do contain this end Permian extinction. And here you have the students that we led last year into the field, and those students are standing for that picture on the end Permian extinction. So that extinction is documented very well in the Karoo. And as I told you, the Karoo is also a very interesting place, not only because of the end Permian extinction, but because you remember the paleosensitivity map from the previous lecture. This paleosensitivity map is glowing red in this area, and this area is actually the Karoo. So you have two hotspots of fossil in South Africa. You have here the Cape Mountains, and you have here the Karoo. And the fossils are very, very well preserved in the Karoo. They are about 300 million to 200 million years old, and you can see that they are very well preserved, like this tiny skull that you can see here. Here you have the snout, the eye, and the teeth, and you can see that they are all perfectly preserved. So that's really the type of deposits that the world is looking at and the world envious for. And in the Karoo, because it covers almost 100 million years of life on Earth, the fossil record of the Karoo also recorded some major events in the history of vertebrates, and particularly the origin of most major groups of vertebrates. So the origin of mammals, the origin of tortoise, the origin of crocodiles and birds and lizards, they can all be traced back to Karoo time ancestors. And this is what we are going to look at right now. So first, you have to understand how tetrapods are classified. You have to understand the classification of tetrapods. So once again, if you are not comfortable with classification, go back to the taxonomy video that I made right in the beginning in lesson 1. If you want to be more comfortable, if you want to be ready to hear about more taxonomy. So the classification of tetrapod is based on the anatomy of the skull. So the skull of tetrapod is primitively anapsid. So anapsid means that you have the nostril here, you have the eye socket here, and behind the eye socket, there's nothing. You don't have to worry about those letters here. They are just to remember the names of the bones, but I don't expect you to know the name of the bones yet. I just want you to know what's happening in this area. So you have the nostril, you have the eye socket, and here there's nothing. It means the skull is anapsid. If you have the nostril, the eye socket, and behind the eye socket there is one hole in the skull, and this hole is called the lower temporal fenestra, then you're looking at a synapsid. So this is the temporal region, and if in the temporal region of the skull you have one hole at the bottom, you are looking at a synapsid skull. And here you have the same, almost the same condition. You have the nostril, the eye, the temporal region. There is one hole in the temporal region, but it's higher on the skull. You can see it's higher on the skull. Instead of being below the SQ bone, it's above the SQ bone. So this condition is called euryapsid. And if you combine the two, the synapsid and the euryapsid, you end up with two temporal fenestra, the upper and the lower temporal fenestra, and this condition is called the diapsid. And if you add to the diapsid condition an additional fenestra on the lower jaw, which is called the mandibular fenestra, and an additional fenestra in front of the orbit, this time not behind the orbit, but in front of the orbit, the anterorbital fenestra, you have an archosaur skull. So the anapsid skull, a skull without any temporal fenestra, is found in tortoise today. A synapsid skull is found in mammals and their ancestor, the mammal-like reptiles. So here you have two examples of mammals, and here you have a mammal-like reptile. You can see the nose, you can see the orbit, and you can see the temporal fenestra here in the lower position. The euryapsid skull, the one with the temporal fenestra at the top. The diapsid first. Sorry. The diapsid skull, so the one with the two temporal fenestra, the one that combines the lower and the upper temporal fenestra, is found in lizards and snakes. And from that condition derive the archosaur, the one with extra fenestra in front of the orbit and on the lower jaw. And this one is found in dinosaurs and crocodiles. So you can see in crocodiles, you have that on the lower jaw, there is a very clear mandibular fenestra. And the euryapsid skull, to finish, is found in Mesozoic marine reptiles. So this is extremely important to understand this. So I strongly suggest that you watch this segment of the video many times so that you understand it before you go to the next step, which will be a quiz. So before the quiz, let's finish about the tetrapods. So among these tetrapods, so we of course we could talk about the evolution of tortoise, about the evolution of euryapsids, about the evolution of lizards and snakes, but it so happens that the history of life was mostly dominated by the archosaurs, so the ones with the two extra fenestra on the lower jaw and anterior to the orbit, and the synapsids, so the ones with the temporal fenestra at the bottom of the temporal region. So the archosaurs and the synapsids completely dominated the games, and the anapsids and the euryapsids were a little less abundant. So for example, the first reptile to exploit, as they say, to exploit the terrestrial landscape, the terrestrial ecosystems were the synapsids. And then after the end Permian extinction, 252 million years ago, they were replaced by the archosaurs. And the archosaurs ultimately evolved into the dinosaurs during the Jurassic and Cretaceous. So this is the period during which dinosaurs dominated the Earth, and dinosaurs are archosaurs. And then comes the end Cretaceous extinction, the Cretaceous Paleogene extinction. The dinosaurs become extinct, but they are replaced by mammals, and the mammals belong to the synapsids. That's what I showed you there. Mammals do have a synapsid skull, and they are replaced by birds. And birds are archosaurs. They do have an archosaur skull, and they are descended from dinosaurs. But we will look at that in detail. So first, the synapsids. So the synapsids or synapsida are all joined by one character, which is one particular feature, that is the presence of one temporal fenestra, which give them a synapsid skull. Lower temporal fenestra, I insist. So this is what you see in this very primitive synapsid from the Permian, and this is what you see in a modern human skull. So this is the jugal arch, so your cheekbone, and the temporal fenestra is located just above your cheekbone and below and behind your eye. So this is your eye socket. So if you touch your head above the cheekbone and behind your eye, you will feel a muscle moving there. This is the muscle that is attached to your temporal fenestra, and it's called the temporal muscle. So the synapsid also have a canine. So if you look at a crocodile, for example, if you look at a fish, if you look at a shark, none of them have a canine. They all have the same teeth in their mouth. The synapsids are the only one that have a canine that distinguish between the dentition in front of the canine, which are the incisors, and the dentition after the canine, which are the molars. And we are the only one, we synapsids, including mammals, are the only one that have this type of dentition. The ecology of synapsid is very diverse because if you include mammals particularly, you will have flying mammals like the bats, and you will have aquatic mammals like whales, but in general, synapsids are terrestrial species and they include herbivores and carnivorous species. And the earliest synapsid is found in the Carboniferous. Sorry, Carboniferous. And they are still alive today because we are synapsids. The classification of synapsid is based mostly on limb posture. So the limb posture is very important in synapsid, and we will see that is also important in dinosaurs. So you have to remember this graph here. So the earliest synapsid had a sprawling posture with the legs on the side of the body like reptiles. And then as they evolved into a more erect posture, so the legs sliding down under the body and supporting the weight of the body like pillars. That's how you differentiate the three main groups of synapsids: the pelycosaurs, which are found from the Carboniferous to the Permian, the basalmos, the most primitive synapsids. These pelycosaurs had a fully sprawling posture. They were very reptilian in their posture, very reptilian looking, and you can see they have a very lizard-like outline with a long tail. And we do find them in the Karoo, for example, Iliosaurus. You can see this very beautiful skeleton. That's a pelycosaur. Then a little more derived and living between the Permian and the Triassic, so a little younger also. They are not only more derived, they are also younger, but remember, this is the law of evolutionary succession. You find the therapsids. The therapsids have a semi-erect posture. It's the intermediate posture here between sprawling and erect, where the limbs are a little more under the body, but not completely sprawling, but not fully erect. So you find them between the Permian and the Triassic, and here you have another beautiful skeleton, beautifully preserved specimen from the Karoo, with the legs on the side and the body. It's wonderfully preserved there. And finally, you have the mammals that originated in the Jurassic, and they are quite they were living in the shadow of dinosaurs for the Jurassic and the Cretaceous, but after the dinosaurs become extinct in the Cretaceous, they dominate the Cenozoic. So if you find the fossil of a mammal, you're almost certain that it comes from the Cenozoic. You are very lucky if you find any mammal in the Jurassic. Yet, we have experts in finding fossils in South Africa who were capable of finding the earliest mammals, some of the earliest mammals in the world, Megazostrodon from the Jurassic of South Africa. So that's probably the earliest mammal. The skull itself is about that size. So if you can see in my screen, the skull is extremely small. So as I was saying, they were little insectivorous species living in the shadows of dinosaurs. And it's only after the dinosaurs went extinct that the mammals finally diversified and became the dominant animals on Earth. And the mammals have a fully erect posture. So if I stand up, you will see that my legs are right under my body instead of being on the side like a reptile. So to conclude about synapsids, mammals are descended from those mammal-like reptiles. So the mammal-like reptiles are the pelycosaurs and the therapsids. They are reptiles in the sense that they were living like reptiles and moving particularly like reptiles with their limbs on the side, but they are mammal-like in the sense that they are the ancestors of mammals. And if you think about it, well, mammals are just a special kind of reptiles, especially if you look at one particular modern mammal, the platypus. So the platypus is a very funny mammal. It's definitely a mammal because it produces milk for its young and it is covered with fur, but yet it lays eggs just like a reptile. So this is the sign, this is a survivor, if I may say, of the time where all mammals were behaving like reptiles. All the mammalian ancestors, the pelycosaurs and the therapsids, were behaving like reptiles. And now we look at the archosaurs. So I told you the other dominant group on Earth. So the archosaurs, as I already told you, they have a skull with two temporal fenestra. So one temporal fenestra here and the second one there. So the lower and the upper one, which gives them a diapsid skull plus one additional fenestra in front of the eye socket, this one here, plus one additional fenestra on the lower jaw, this one here. So that's how you recognize an archosaur skull. So if I give you the picture of an archosaur skull, now you have no excuse. You should be able to identify it. And that's the same for all those different types of cranial morphology that I gave you. If I give you a picture of an animal of the skull of an animal and you find one opening on the side in this position, you know it's a synapsid, and you know that if you find a temporal fenestra in this position, it's a euryapsid, and you know that if you have the two, it's a diapsid, and if you add this one and this one, it's an archosaur. So, and we have a very, very good fossil record of archosaurs in South Africa, particularly in the Triassic and in the Jurassic. Here, for example, this is the skull of Erythrosuchus, and here you have a reconstruction of its very close relative, Garjaina madiba. So Madiba, once again, named after Nelson Mandela. They were very close relative. They were really the Tyrannosaurus of South Africa during the Triassic, very large, fierce carnivorous species. And once again, the classification is mostly based on the posture and locomotion particularly. So in archosaurs, you have three main groups, the crocodiles. So I've shown you the picture earlier. The crocodiles belong to the archosaurs, and they have a sprawling posture, and they live mostly a semi-aquatic lifestyle. They live in water. So they have this type of posture. The pterosaurs, pterosauria, that are the Mesozoic flying reptiles. So you probably seen that in movies, those big flying reptiles that live alongside the dinosaurs. Well, they are not dinosaurs, they are actually pterosaurs. They are flying reptiles. They are related to dinosaurs because they do belong to the archosaurs, but they are not dinosaurs. And you have finally the dinosaurs, the true dinosaurs, and the true dinosaurs are recognized by their erect posture. Their limbs are straight under the body, unlike the crocodiles and unlike the pterosaurs. So now it's time to see if you understood this very well with a quiz.